The rain was falling hard over the glass gates of the Hale estate in Connecticut, turning the entire world into a blur of silver and steel. When Marcus Walker stood soaked to the bone with his 5-year-old son trembling in his arms, wondering if desperation had finally pushed him too far this time, the child's breathing was shallow, fragile, each gasp like a thread about to snap, and Marcus felt the kind of fear that does not ask permission before it destroys a man from the inside. If you were standing there holding someone you loved more than your own life, would you have turned back when the world told you that you did not belong? The gates ahead were guarded by polished security men who looked like they had never struggled for anything in their lives. One of them, Ethan Brooks, noticed Marcus immediately and laughed under his breath, as if the sight itself was an insult to the perfect world behind those gates. Marcus looked nothing like someone who should be there, just a single father in a worn jacket, carrying a sick child and a plastic folder of medical papers that were already fading from the rain. Ethan's expression made it clear that people like Marcus were meant to stay outside, in the storm, in the places where no one important had to see them. Marcus had not come for pride. He had come because the hospital had refused to admit his son without an impossible payment, and the only name he had left to try was the billionaire Jonathan Hale, a man Marcus had once saved years ago in a different life, a life he rarely spoke about anymore. Back then Marcus had worn a different uniform, carried different burdens, and believed the world still recognized sacrifice. Now, all he had was a child in his arms, and a memory that felt too distant to prove anything. Ethan stepped forward, amused and irritated at the same time, already deciding Marcus was just another desperate man trying to sneak into wealth that was not his. The guard's eyes scanned Marcus with slow judgment, lingering on the worn shoes, the tired face, the trembling child. There was laughter again, quiet but sharp, the kind that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. Marcus felt it but did not react, because his son shifted slightly in his arms, and that mattered more than pride. Inside the estate, lights glowed warm and golden, a world untouched by hunger or fear. Marcus asked again for help, not loudly, not angrily, but with a quiet urgency that only a father who has run out of time can understand. Ethan responded with more ridicule, telling him through actions that he did not belong near people like Jonathan Hale. The rain grew heavier, and for a moment it felt like the entire universe was agreeing with the guard. But Marcus did something unexpected. He slowly adjusted his grip on his son, then rolled up his sleeve. Under the wet fabric, a faded mark became visible, a military insignia and a deep scar running across his forearm, the kind earned in places most people never hear about. It was not meant to impress anyone, but it carried a truth that silence could not hide. Ethan's laughter faltered for the first time, though he tried to mask it with contempt. Marcus did not speak of what the scar meant, because some stories do not need words to exist. Instead, he stood still, letting the weight of his past settle into the present. Years ago, he had pulled men out of burning wreckage overseas, stood between danger and civilians when no one else would step forward. And once, in a crisis that never made headlines, he had saved the life of a young man who later became the very billionaire behind these gates. Life, however, does not always keep receipts for courage. Inside the mansion, Jonathan Hale was informed that a man was outside claiming urgency tied to an old debt of survival. Something about the description made him pause, an uncomfortable flicker in his memory that he could not fully place. Meanwhile, outside, Marcus felt his son's grip weakening, each passing second stealing something precious. The guard continued to delay him, but uncertainty had begun to replace certainty in Ethan's eyes. Then Jonathan Hale appeared at the entrance, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Wealthy silence turned into attention, and even Ethan stepped aside slightly. Jonathan looked at Marcus for only a moment before recognition struck him like a physical force. The rain, the child, the tired man holding himself together by sheer will, it all connected to a memory buried beneath years of success and comfort. Marcus was not just any man. He was the one who had once carried Jonathan out of chaos when no one else could. Ethan froze as the truth unfolded without being spoken to loudly. The man he had mocked was not a beggar, not an intruder, but someone whose courage had once written a chapter in Jonathan's life. Marcus did not demand gratitude, nor did he ask for recognition. His only focus remained on his son, whose breathing had grown dangerously faint. Pride, revenge, and embarrassment suddenly felt meaningless compared to that small, fragile life. Jonathan ordered immediate help, and for the first time, Marcus allowed himself to feel exhaustion. The estate doors opened, not as a privilege offered reluctantly, but as a correction of a mistake that should never have happened. Ethan stepped back completely now, the earlier laughter gone, replaced by a heavy silence that felt like regret settling into his chest. Inside, medical assistance was called instantly, and Marcus stood in the grand hallway still holding his son, refusing to let go until someone stronger took over. The world he had been excluded from only minutes earlier now moved urgently for him. But Marcus did not look around in victory. He looked only at his child, whispering silently into the storm inside his mind that he would not lose this battle. Hours later, when the crisis had finally stabilized and the child's condition was no longer critical, Jonathan approached Marcus again. There was no arrogance left in his voice, only humility and a kind of respect that money had never been able to buy. Ethan, standing far behind, no longer carried laughter in his posture, only the weight of realization that he had judged a man by appearance instead of truth. Marcus did not ask for apologies. He simply stood by the window of the estate, watching the rain finally begin to fade, as if the world itself was learning something painful but necessary. His son was alive, and that was all that mattered. Everything else, including the humiliation, the gate, and the laughter, had already become part of a story he would not allow bitterness to define. Because sometimes the wrong man is only wrong in the eyes of those who never bothered to look deeper. And sometimes the quietest fathers carry the strongest storms inside them, waiting for the moment the world finally learns their name. If this story touched your heart, comment below what you would have done in Marcus's place when the world shut the door on him. And if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe only if it truly reached your heart. Because sometimes kindness is the only thing that can change how we see the wrong man in the right light.